Thanks, Graham. My name is Erik Schaeffer, as he said. I come from Santa Maria University down in Austin, Texas. I'm also known as PHP Diddy on the IRC channel, Twitter, phpdiddy.com if you want to check my blog out or stuff. That's my Tumblr blog, so if Tumblr actually stays up for more than 5 minutes, then you'll be able to see that. So I wanted to kind of introduce myself real quick because I'm not really a part of the core CakePHP team or anything, but I've been doing PHP since about 2002. I've been doing CakePHP since about 2006. I actually started with 1.1. I have a bachelor's in computer information science, which I say, yay, that's a piece of paper. And I'm a Zen certified engineer for PHP 4 and PHP 5, so more paper. Because none of that really says anything about what I can actually do. So to show you a little bit, CD Fuse and Double Stereo is the first thing I did with CakePHP. I'm the lead developer for that company. It does a lot of things like e-commerce, Amazon S3 integration. Just to kind of give you a quick look, I actually did an article for the bakery that's a case study on this site about 3 or 4 years ago. So pretty simple. Does a lot of stuff, like I said, with Amazon's S3 to save images, save MP3s, and stuff like that. What are some of the things I've actually done for CakePHP is I have written some articles for the bakery, the CD Fuse case study, like I just mentioned, another one for custom URLs from the site root, and done some stuff recently with custom sessions using database storage. Had some tricks to try and actually make that work. I've submitted a couple bugs that I think somebody said these aren't really bugs, they just need to learn how to use some things. And I've edited roughly 1 line of documentation for Form Helper in 1.3. At St. Edward's, I'm the lead developer, web architect there. And we've been using CakePHP for a few years and have used it for a number of different projects, actually. The first one that we did was a financial aid calculator. It's a pretty simple app. This runs on one of our recruiting sites. All it does is takes in all of this kind of information about your class rank, your SAT scores and everything, how much your parents make, and then gives you a nice, pretty set of results after that. We do a couple things like geolocation on the IP address that it's coming from that we can then give to our admissions department so they can see kind of what the demographics are and where people are coming from. That was the first app that we ever built. I think that's actually still running in 1.1. From there, we built an app called for Source. Source is a symposium on undergraduate research and creative expression. And this was more or less a website, but we have a whole system for professors that they get notified whenever students list them as a mentor for their posters or for their presentations that they give. So there's a whole system for them to log in, approve that, they get email reminders, etc. So nothing really that fancy on that one. Writing Center is the one that we've been, well, almost finished with. Chris over here has been working on it for a while. We have a Writing Center on campus so that when students need help with papers or whatnot, they can come and meet with faculty members and kind of get information or get grammatical help or things like that. And we've done some kind of cool things. We mapped or mirrored some of the functionality actually from Apple's Genius Bar appointments. Because we thought the functionality worked pretty well. All of our apps are pretty much based on jQuery. So we have this nice scheduling system where you can go back and forth and decide, oh, I want to go to this appointment. Takes you on to set up you can set up what class this is for. This is the first one we actually did reminders via SMS as well. So we just built, there's a whole separate database that we keep. So this app actually connects up to 2 separate DBs. And this database just keeps track of all of the kind of SMS gateways that we need to have. So this is really based just off of email address. From there, one of our really big projects that we finished about a year ago is called UPost. We had a problem where everything right now that we do for news and announcements across the university is actually done via newsletters that go out to staff, faculty, undergraduates, graduate students, etc. We didn't have any real way to centralize how all of that information was coming in, and we had no way of centralizing calendar information. So what we did with UPost was we built a system kind of in 2 different ways. The first system for actually taking in all kinds of news and announcements was built all within Cake. And then on the other side of things for the calendar, what we're actually doing is we've integrated with Drupal to make XML-RPC calls to Drupal to send and receive data back and forth for the calendar data. One of the reasons that we did that was simply because calendaring can be kind of a pain when it starts to get really complex. So we said Drupal's already got all these modules set up, it's got systems for RSVPs and stuff, so let's just use that, but make a really, really nice front end for people to get that data in. We also integrated all the login that I'm doing on here integrates with our university LDAP server for all of our centralized authentication. And I'll step through in a second here all of the LDAP and Drupal kind of stuff that we did. Just to give you an idea of how all this works, popping into the newsletters, again, we had to put a nicer front end on Drupal's side because Drupal doesn't really give us a whole lot of options for doing a lot of really nice multi-step forms and really walking through how to do everything. So we've got all of these. Oh wait, was that something different? Yeah. So this kind of just lets us come in and put in information. We can put in web address. All the information down below is grabbed via our LDAP server and then brought in. We've done some stuff with jQuery UI so that we have nice, pretty date pickers and things like that. So you can say, I want the next 7 days worth. The data comes in like this, and then we have to actually take that and string to time a lot of stuff to actually get it to work in PHP and save it into our DBs. So that's the basic gist of that. Again, we also use MailChimp for sending out all of our mail. There was a component that was actually built that was on the bakery. We brought that component in, did a couple of edits to it so that we could do some things like actually pulling back all the stats and things that come from MailChimp. So before we had this system, there was no way to know who was actually opening any emails, who was doing anything or clicking on any of the links. So being able to send it through MailChimp, we now have all that data, so we can come in here and say, I want to view the stats for this one that went out back in August of '09. And this actually goes out, hits the MailChimp servers, brings back all the statistics. We drop in a nice little flash chart to show just kind of a pie graph of what's going on. Down below, we can see all the URLs and the number of clicks that each of them got. And then down here, we actually bring in the newsletter that gets sent out, and we have heat mapping that can occur on the links inside of here to know kind of, again, just a more visual way for our marketing department to see what's actually happening. Omnio is our next project that we're working on right now, and it's a complete portal project. The portals that we've been looking at so far have been pretty lackluster and extremely expensive to try and integrate. So we decided to build one completely in-house, and I'll show you guys that a little bit later. So what's this all about? Well, basically, we have all these systems and APIs, and as we all know, there's all these ways that we can connect up with Cake. So at St. Ed's, just like any other business, we've got things like LDAP for centralized authentication, and CAS and Shibboleth or some other single sign-on mechanism is what's next on our plate. ERP systems, which we can't hit yet because ours has absolutely no API. Blackboard and Moodle are learning management systems that, for class announcements, class projects, things like that, discussion boards that our students are going to want data out of. We've integrated with, like I said, we've integrated with MailChimp. Zimbra, I don't know if anybody has used Zimbra in here at all. Yeah. Anybody else actually in higher education in here? Yeah, a couple people, cool. Zimbra is a collaboration software, kind of like an Exchange server, an open source version of Exchange. We pay for the support version, but we've done some things where we can actually get to the SOAP requests and things for that, so we can pull in calendar and email and things like that. And then Drupal is the content management system that runs our front-end website as well as our back-end website. So Drupal kind of just holds all of this content that we really need to push to and pull from. So the fact that we've built some things that we can do that with Drupal and Cake makes it just so much easier to interact with those two systems. So CakePHP is really the glue. It's the glue that's holding all of these different pieces together for us. Especially with Omnio, that portal product that we're coming out with, it really is the way that all of these things are just going to attach to each other. So let's look at some code and stuff. LDAP integration, I'm going to go over kind of how we set up an LDAP user model and an LDAP auth component for actually extending the built-in auth component to do authentication. Then I'm also going to go over some stuff with Drupal integration that we did as far as how we set up the Drupal side of things, what vendor files we had to pull into Cake, and how we built our Drupal component to actually do all that. And Omnio is really just kind of do a description of how we're using Cake to its fullest in that product. So for LDAP integration, there's really two big pieces to the puzzle. We have a model that's LDAP user. This model sets up an LDAP connection. It's responsible for checking the username and password. This could be included in the component itself, but it's better from an object-oriented perspective to pull that out. And lastly, it probably should be a data source too, but it isn't. We're going to refactor that eventually. We just haven't had an opportunity to do that just yet. And then the component LDAP auth, basically, like I said, it extends the built-in auth component that's in Cake, so you can use all of the normal auth commands like login, logout, et cetera, which is nice because when you're starting to work with ACL and needing to do some LDAP auth, it makes it a lot easier to have that core functionality in place. And then again, it enables the pre-authentication of users against LDAP. So let's look at some code. Zoom in here. This LDAP user model, there's a couple articles in the Bakery, one by John Anderson, one by Bill Hunt. I've got the URLs there. Both of them kind of gave me a really good foundation for how they did some things in their user models, so we just kind of did a couple tweaks here and there to make it work with our systems. The basics of it, LDAP user extends app model, that's pretty simple. We set some of our attributes that we're going to need, such as the host, the port, and the base that we're going to search off of. The constructor basically does what the parent constructor is going to do and then connects up to LDAP based on the options that we give it. If a username and password are set, then it'll try and bind to LDAP based on that. Otherwise, it just does an anonymous bind. The structure is pretty simple. We implemented a find all, which will get all of the actual records that match whatever query we're sending. Since we actually do have, it is possible that a person could have the same ID number but have two different accounts in our LDAP server. We actually need to find every record that we can get. From there, this auth basically goes through, looks to see if we can actually find the UID is our unique identifier in our LDAP server, so it just searches to see if this person is even in there. If they are, then what we're going to do is we actually try to bind based on that information. If the bind is proper, if it's correct, then we're going to send back the result, which gives us all that information from LDAP, so name, email address, phone number, all that kind of information. Otherwise, return false, and then if it couldn't actually get a result, return false. Convert from LDAP is really just kind of a helper function to clean up some of the stuff that comes from LDAP. When LDAP gives us information back, it's got a series of nested arrays and things, and we just use this to kind of pull all that information out and clean it up for the component. So then the LDAP auth component, does everybody see this all right? Do you need to make it a little bit bigger? Is it good? Found a lot of code on the Bakery, on Google, on various sites across the web on how to do this. This was just kind of what we built that worked for us. So by all means, there are probably better things out there nowadays, but this is what works for us, and so we're probably going to continue to use it for the near future. Pull in the auth component. This is going to extend the auth component. We're going to tell it what the LDAP model is. Similar to how in the regular auth component, you basically have to tell what the user model is that you're using, and then Cake will get that model. Same kind of thing for our LDAP model. The startup function here is basically, once the component starts up, this is the basic startup function for any component. What we're going to do is catch a couple things. So we're going to catch and see if the action that's coming in is login, and the data if data is set in the user model, then let's go ahead and put some temporary variables set up, and then send it over to our pre-auth user function. So pre-auth user takes in that information. It gets the model information for LDAP and for the user model. It then actually does the authentication function that was in our LDAP user. If it's not equal to false, then let's go ahead and continue, because that means that we found them and we were successfully bound to that user account. From there, since it's successful, let's go ahead and find out if this user is actually in our database, because what we do is we keep kind of a local cache of the users from LDAP in our local DB. We could probably just keep everything on LDAP if we wanted to. This just makes things a little bit simpler whenever we're trying to do connections and whatnot. So if the data is not found, so if we didn't find them in the DB, then let's go ahead and set these fields for our data, and because we're going to have to go ahead and save this user. And we have to set up the username, et cetera. Later on when we're setting some of the other fields, the username is not going to get set over again. And this is where it comes in, where we have to find all of the records. The way that it works at St. Ed's is if we have a student or a staff member that is both things, so let's say I'm a staff member that's also taking classes and a student, I actually have two different records in LDAP, one for my student account and one for my staff account. So this lets us see all of the actual accounts that you have set up, and then we're going to make it in our application so that whenever you log in, we can detect if you're both, so that we can do certain things or deliver information both ways. So this just goes based off of the employee number, and this is the result string that just comes back from LDAP. So we're basing this off of just, anybody that has the employee number, which is just the ID number that we have across campus, goes out and finds that. This little setup right here then basically checks to see which one, if there is an alternate there, if there is more than one, or if we've grabbed possibly the student one first instead of the staff. So if the alternate's empty, that means they only have one account. Otherwise, we need to do some things just to, like I said, set them up so that we've got both of their accounts set up. These classifications based on if you're working in a specific department or if you're a specific major or belong to a specific school or degree plan, we can put those classifications in so that we can keep track of that information. This is just a check right here to see that if the current one that we have is not your staff one, then we're going to flip them around so that we know we've got your staff one as your primary login. And then this is just copying all this kind of information into a data model so that we can save this to the database. This is all the information. We could pull out quite a bit of this information and do a separate profile table so that we're not hitting all of this data every time we need to authenticate. But we don't have that many students, staff, and faculty at St. Ed's. We have about 6,500 total students, staff, and faculty. So performance really isn't going to be an issue. In some of your apps, that's been a frequent thing of database optimization, is to pull the profile data out of whatever table you're using to authenticate against. From there, we just do a couple other series of checks for our own purposes behind the scenes to know, again, if you're staff or faculty, or if you're staff and faculty, if you have a student account. From there, we save the data, return as true if everything works out, and otherwise return false. And we come back up to our startup then. If we had an unsuccessful setup with the LDAP, then we just set password to 0 or to nothing. And when that happens, then Cake's built-in auth component, when we run the parent startup on this, Cake's built-in auth component is going to say, oh, well, this isn't a valid user because there's no password involved. It doesn't match up. So it works actually really well. And that's pretty much it. From this point, you can use LDAP component or your LDAP auth anywhere you would have used regular auth, and it's going to do the same kind of thing. All the regular, normal auth functions that come in core can still be used without any problems. And like I said, for when we're working with auth and ACL together, that really makes life a lot easier. So going on to what we did with Drupal integration was a little interesting. Setting up Drupal out of the box, Drupal doesn't really have a whole lot in terms of web services. There's a services module that you can install, and the services module gives you a lot of options of what you can do. You can do XML-RPC, you can do JSON, you can do REST, so AMF. Pretty much any service that you want to set up, you can do within Drupal. The key is that you have to do it yourself. There's only like a handful of things like authentication and basic saving of nodes, which are just the actual content objects in Drupal. That's about all that you get. So you really have to write all of your own XML services to deliver that information or accept that information. And then from there, we also wrote or also used the Devel module. Devel is a module really used only for debugging, but it's really cool to let you see what's happening inside of Drupal, because otherwise it's kind of hard to know with a various, with trying to use printr and all other kinds of stuff, it's pretty hard to know what's happening. So the develop module actually lets you see what's going on inside. It lets you see exactly what nodes and objects look like on the Drupal side of things. You can also see, similar to Cake's debugging, you can see the SQL queries that are running when you're doing things in Drupal. So if you're saving a node or viewing a node or anything like that, you can actually see the SQL queries that are running. And that's really important, again, because you have to write your own services. And the only other thing is to be sure to turn this off for production, because it can be a performance problem, and as well, you don't probably want people to see the exact way that people are doing SQL queries on your site. The services module setup that we went with was XML-RPC, and really the reason was at the time that we were implementing it, it had the best documentation. REST obviously is something we would have liked to use, but there just wasn't as much documentation on that setup as there was on the XML-RPC side. So that's the one that we went with. As I said, you write your own services, some built in. CCK, is anybody actually using Drupal actively? Yeah? So CCK, for those that don't know, is a content creation kit, which allows you to build custom content types. So it comes out of the box with like page or blog entry or things like that. CCK lets you build something very specific. Let's say you have a piece of content that requires an image with a caption, with a body, with some other meta tag information or some other data element that you need. It lets you build all of that yourself. The problem can be the way that Drupal stores CCK nodes in the various tables that it has can be kind of tricky whenever you're trying to save things. Taxonomy can actually be kind of tricky too. Node objects and arrays must match up from the Cake side. This was the biggest thing that gave us the most headaches with trying to do Drupal integration. If the arrays and objects that Drupal expects that you're sending from Cake don't match up exactly, I mean to a T exactly, it will not work at all. And you'll try and debug day and night to try and figure out what's happening, and you'll have one element where, Drupal expects everything to start the array at 1, for instance, instead of 0 at one of the arrays for taxonomy. And if you don't match that up, then it's going to just completely not work. It was an interesting something that we found out over our testing. So for the Drupal integration, what we did was we created a Drupal vendor folder, and there's a handful of files from Drupal that we need to actually copy over. Bootstrap.inc, these are functions just need to be included on every Drupal request. Some of the other pieces of information actually need this to function, or some of the other files need that to function. Common.inc are more common functions that many Drupal modules need. And XML-RPC is just the XML-RPC library for Drupal. So let's look at some code here. As you can see, here's our vendors folder. Drupal, Bootstrap, Common, and XML-RPC are just dropped inside of there. And then this is the Drupal component that we built to actually do all of our calls. So this Drupal component starts off pretty much just like any other regular component. We set some attributes. We put the URL in of the XML-RPC service that we're going to hit. We keep track of our session and our session ID, which is important for authentication. In our startup, then, we go ahead and import all of our vendor files. So the XML-RPC, the Bootstrap, and the Common get imported on the startup of the component. From there, we have an authentication function. So this function authenticate basically goes out first and does an anonymous hit to System Connect. So that's the first thing that we have, that when we hit that XML-RPC connection first, and just do a connection with an anonymous setup. Once we have the session content from that, or once we have that information, then we can do a true bind with the username and password so that we can actually log in. We have to log in to actually put in any kind of nodes or anything like that. So this is the process that does that. And then we just keep track of the Drupal session ID just for ease of use later on. If anything errors out, then we send back our XML-RPC error, or say that to this error string, return false, otherwise return true. Do call is what actually does everything. Basically, it accepts the XML-RPC method that we want to run, whether that be node.save or any other method that you write inside of the Drupal side. and then the set of parameters that goes along with that. So the parameters usually can be accepted either way, either as an array of parameters, which is what Cake does quite a bit, or as parameter 1, parameter 2, parameter 3. We wrote all of our stuff to just take in a random array of parameters because it's just easier to try and to write a component that would do this for us. So basically, we just see if we authenticate. If we do, then we're going to make the call, and it's going to take the URL from our attributes, send in the method that we passed, give the Drupal session ID that we got from authentication, and then pass in the parameters that we're going to need that we use. And same kind of thing. If it doesn't work, then we're going to put in an error string and return false. Otherwise, we're going to return that call, and all that information that goes along with it is going to be returned with us. Beyond that, these are just a couple of helper functions that we put that are specific to ours. We actually use the Drupal site that stores this information as kind of a taxonomy database for other systems across the university. So one of the things that we do is keep all of our department codes and what departments those go with inside of the database. This URL right here doesn't have anything to do with services. What we actually did in Drupal is created a view. And for those that are not familiar with Drupal, views let you basically kind of manipulate content and deliver it in different forms, almost somewhat like how we can do views in Cake. But with this view, we basically look at our taxonomy of department codes and department listings, and we pass that back as raw XML, so then we can read that into a simple XML element and return that back so that we can parse that in the Cake side. Get department for user, that's specific to this app where you pass us a department and we'll tell you what users go along with it or what departments go along with a specific user. So that's nothing fancy. To show you kind of an idea of what I was saying as far as how your node arrays have to match exactly, this is something in our events controller as to where we actually prep the data for pushing it to Drupal. So this is the format that Drupal expects. And like I said, it has got to be exact. So you'll have where you have, these are CCK fields right here, where we have field event cost. And then you have a 0 element inside of that, and then the value inside of that, which is where the value goes. So if you send it just field event cost with the value, which is what you would think would work, it's going to complain and not do anything and not save a thing. So this was the biggest headache, was figuring out exactly what Drupal wanted and how we go through and actually push this information in. So to talk a little bit about Omnio, Omnio is a portal product that we're working on right now. At St. Ed's, we're going through a really, really big transition where every piece of web property that we have right now is going away, and we're rebuilding everything. Front end, back end, intranet, all of it. As I said, we had looked at other portal products, and they're ridiculously expensive and don't do nearly as much things as we need to do. So we're going to build one ourselves. The idea is that we want to open source this back to the community once we're finished. We're doing heavy integration with so many different services, LDAP, Drupal integration with single sign-on. We've got single sign-on working with our Zimbra collaboration server. And we're using heavy use of almost every aspect of Cake. In order to give this back to the open source community, we want to make sure that anyone else that's going to work on this doesn't come back to us to say, hey, why isn't this a data source instead of a component? So we had to do things like implementing themes so that we can make sure everybody can theme their own systems as they want to. We had to do things like using plugins so that everybody could build their own widgets and whatnot that would go inside of these. And we're going to have to use data sources more so that we can just abstract that layer out of everything. So to kind of just give you a look at what it is and kind of show you how we've done some of these things. One Stop is the internal brand for it, not our choice. So all of these individual widgets, these are actually all plugins. So every one of these widgets is a plugin that has its own vendors and everything. That was important, especially for the Zimbra pieces, because the vendor that we're going to have for Zimbra, not everybody's going to need that in their vendors. So keeping all of these widgets separated out as plugins makes things a lot easier. Everything is built using jQuery UI and has nice, pretty drag and drop kind of stuff. But this is how we're going to be able to give everybody across the university all the information that they need, kind of at a quick glance. to kind of show you how this is the Zimbra single sign-on. When we click on new message, it's going to automatically log me in and take me over to my email and start composing a new message. This is also integrating with the Drupal site. That's the informational site for current students, faculty, and staff. So whenever we use the Drupal site, we have a Google Search Appliance, and that's actually being fed from the Drupal side. So there's some embedded JavaScript that you can pass from Drupal straight into Cake, and that gives us the ability to do kind of a site-wide search. And this is obviously still in alpha. Clicking on Browse right here, this list actually is built from the taxonomy terms XML that I just showed from our Drupal component. So all of these just link us to a specific area on our internal website. So I can jump over to School of Humanities, and it's going to take me there, and it's actually going to log me into Drupal and everything, so I'm ready to go. As you can see, I'm logged in. I can edit. I can do anything like I would normally in Drupal. We're keeping this top bar consistent, and although we haven't done it yet, the plan is to refactor that and put that into actually the Cake side, so that Drupal basically just pulls from the Cake side, so we only have to maintain one place. Like I said, all these Zimbra pieces, we have a Zimbra SOAP client. They have a REST client for Zimbra, but it's really not very full-featured, so we decided to use SOAP for this. And we found a pretty decent SOAP vendor file that we could use for Zimbra, and just drop that into our plugins directory on Omnio. And I can give you kind of a look at what we've got in there. So our plugins then, basically we have our Zimbra plugin with all of our information, all of our controllers, etc. We have our Zimbra calendar controller. Does a lot of things like it reads the username from the current session so that we can do some things like dropping in that username whenever we're going to pass parameters to Zimbra, so we get all that information back about that user. We've got inside here, as I said, we've got our own vendors folder with the Zimbra API sitting inside of that. So plugins have made it really easy to make widgets. And the cool thing is since we're not the only development team on campus, we can actually pass that out to other users across campus and say, hey, if you want to make a widget, just make a plugin. And then we can drop that in and we're ready to go. It's ready to be implemented. As I said, we're also using themes pretty heavily inside of this. We just have one thing right now for one stop. But we have specific elements, and et cetera, for that. I'm running a little early, but I guess that's all right because we got time for some questions. Just to kind of wrap it up, we love CakePHP at St. Ed's. As I said, we've been using it for a few years. It's really helped us become much, much better developers and more efficient and do a lot of really cool projects that in the past there's no way we would have actually been able to do. Chris over here actually does a lot of work with faculty and student projects as well. He's got one that he's worked on that does CakePHP pushing stuff to a Flex front end for faculty members. Make life easy, extend core. Don't try and rewrite anything. Just extend the core. So like the auth component and how we did LDAP auth, just extend those things. Because really with the LDAP auth component, almost any auth should work pretty much the same way. If you extend the built-in auth component, you're going to make your life just so much easier. Drupal and Cake are just a match made in heaven. There's so many ways to push content to and pull content from. It's really easy to get at that information. I know the next presentation actually by Mark is going to be talking a little bit more about specifics of Drupal. I think we've done some things a little bit differently, but it'll be cool to see that. And then did I mention that we love Cake? Yeah, we do. So a little early, but any questions, comments? Yeah. Absolutely, yeah. I'll put these slides and all the code samples and stuff that I have up on my blog, or hit me up on Twitter if I haven't done it fast enough for you, please, by all means. So yeah, I'll do that.
Are you planning to build a learning management system like what's the name?
Like Blackboard and Moodle? We aren't planning to do that. We actually, right now, we're in a phase where we really want to do some things. We use Blackboard at St. Ed's right now, but we have Blackboard 8.6, I think is what it is, and it doesn't have a web services API built out of the box. So we would have to build something in Java to deliver web services if we actually wanted to do that. Blackboard 9 has it built in, and I know Moodle has that all built in as well. So we haven't really looked at building one ourselves, but we are definitely looking at how we're going to integrate with those two systems going forward, depending on which one we choose to go with kind of in the future. Yeah?
What's been your experience deploying CakePHP apps in education world? Do you run up against people who don't want to deploy PHP apps? Or PHP in general?
We haven't, honestly. Whenever I got hired there about 5 years ago, and at the time, the entire team before me had left, and they actually didn't do any development before that. And it took a little work just to get our administrative computing side of folks, who they do all their work in Perl, to get them to accept that we actually are developers and we do know what we're doing. But once we kind of got that through and we showed them kind of the apps that we built and showed them how we are being secure, we are making sure that people are doing things over SSL and whatnot, we haven't really had a lot of people that have an issue with it. Before we started building PHP, there was some Cold Fusion done. Chris, I think, still likes Cold Fusion a little bit, but that's okay. I don't hate him for that. But other than that, I mean, we didn't really have any other way to do it. So at that point, once we had PHP, we said, all right, well, this is what we're going to build in. And everybody said, kind of, okay, I'll let that happen. Yeah. It's been brought up. At this point, I don't think that, again, the biggest issue with us is our ERP system. That ERP runs a lot of things like scheduling or registering for classes, paying your bills and things like that. And that system is ancient, I mean antiquated. It still uses Apache authentication to even log you in. There's no session control, no cookies, no nothing. And until we get some more traction with that team to try and maybe implement some pieces to that, I don't think we're going to be able to go that route. But we're definitely open to it. We said we didn't know why our applications for admission weren't just available via Facebook Connect. You know, Facebook Connect, and then we can get some of that data right away, and you can start applying for school. But the guys that want utmost security say that's a problem for some reason. Is there another? Yeah.
Quick question. In general, how's it been like convincing people to move technologies like say Cold Fusion to PHP to CakePHP, stuff like that? How do you get them to sort of go on to the next level once you know something that already works?
Well, that's a pretty difficult thing to do, actually. There's a lot of that around St. Ed's, especially that, hey, this works, so why are we going to change it? But, you know, applications and the things that people use and the things that students use on a day-to-day basis have changed so much over the past, you know, even 2 years, it's changed so much. And, you know, these guys that are, or these kids that are coming into school looking at things like Facebook and Flickr and Twitter and things like that, they expect everything to work that same way. So when they come to us and they say, well, you know, I got to register for classes, but I have to log into this weird system that's all black text on a white background and stuff. And really, you know, we kind of let the community drive that. When the community starts asking for more things and better ways to do things and more automation, then it just gives us more leverage to say, well, we can do it. And, you know, once we kind of got a couple applications under our belt, then the door kind of was wide open. We could pretty much do whatever we wanted at that point. Anyone else? Yeah. Yes, we are. Yeah, we're going to open source it. The project is scheduled to be completed in January. So probably once we do that, we'll do some amount of refactoring to take any things that's really specific to us out and then push that back out into the wild. That's the plan. Anyone else? No? All right. Well, thanks, y'all. This is all my information. PHP Diddy. Get in touch anytime you want. I'm around.